These are the solutions for the front of the study guide for Algebra A, Test 5 of Quarter 3. And the first question is going to ask us how many times does the graph, they'll give us a quadratic, cross the x-axis. There are three different solutions, and what we end up using is the discriminant. And the discriminant is this. It's pretty much the square root of the b squared minus 4ac. Now, I draw the square root symbol around it. Really, it's just the b squared minus 4ac, but I think it explains it a little bit better. And so if this is a negative number, you can't have a negative number underneath the radical sign. So that's why I like to draw that radical sign. And again, there's a plus or minus sign here, too. And that'll kind of explain it as well. So if it's a negative number, you can't have that. And so we end up with 0. 0 times it will cross the x-axis. If this were equal to 0 itself, then we would end up canceling out the plus or minus sign, so you're just left with negative b over 2a. And that would be just one solution. And then if we had it equal to a positive number would end up having that plus or minus sign, and we'd end up with two answers, or two x-intercepts. So that's what we're trying to do on this problem. So the first thing to do is figure out which is the a, the b, and the c term. So our a term is 2. It's the number out in front of x squared. B is negative 4, and c is positive 2. So we go ahead and substitute those numbers in there. So we have a plus or minus, and we'll just draw the square root symbol for now. Square root of negative 4 quantity squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, and c, which is 2. Do some more work there. We've got the square root of this 16 minus, because there's only one negative here, 4 times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So we end up with 0 underneath the radical sign. So if we have 0, that means we only have one solution, one x-intercept. That is our answer. So we're just using the discriminant in this case. Here we're having to graph a quadratic. We're going to have two different types. It's either going to be a y equals negative x squared, or it'll be a y equals x squared. So positive 2, this is our y-intercept. And it also represents our vertex. And so we're going to go up 2 spaces, put the dot there, and then we use our parent graph. So the parent graph works this way. If you have y equals negative x squared, that's the same thing as negative 1 times x squared. And if you go over 1 in the x direction, and it's always from vertex, from that vertex, that means that you'll end up squaring that number, multiplying by a negative, it gives us negative 1. So what that means is over 1 in the x, down 1 in the y direction. If you square 2, you get 4 times by negative 1 gives us negative 4. So from vertex over 2 down 4 spaces. And that's our graph. And then from there you just sketch what the graph ends up looking like. Well, look at this next one. We've got something similar. We've got negative 3. That is our y-intercept. So that's where we're going to start this graph. It's going to go down 3 spaces, put the dot there. And then we look at the y equals x squared. This is our parent graph. So this is what makes the shape. So we have y equals x squared. If you square 1, you get 1. So what that means from the vertex, if you go over 1 space in the x direction, you're going to go up 1 space because it's a positive 1 in the y. If we square 2, we get 4. So that means in the x direction 2 spaces, y direction 4 spaces. So over 2, up 4 spaces. That's 3 and 4 will be right there. So I have a point there and there. And it's always from the vertex. That's the key. So from that pink point that I had. Well, taking a look at the next one. This one is a little different. So here we have a quadratic. It's already factored for us. They want us to figure out what the solutions are. And they want us to sketch the graph and circle the real roots. So we've got 3 things to do. So first of all, the roots, or the solutions, are when you take the factor, x plus 2, and you set it equal to 0. And you just do some opposite operations, and we get our answer here. So x equals negative 2. That's one of our values. So we go over 2 spaces to the left and we've got ourselves a point. The next one is 2x minus 5 equals 0. So here we have to add the 5. That's the first step. Got this 2x equals 5, and then you divide by 2. And so we end up with x equals, now here's where you might want to change this to a mixed number. 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 left over, so 2 1/2. So if I go over 2 spaces and a half, I've got my other point. Now, those are the 2 points. Now, in order to figure out which way it opens, if you multiply x times 2x, you get 2x squared. So you see it's going to end up opening up. So all you have to do is figure out where that vertex is, somewhere around in here somewhere. So it's going to come down. It's going to bottom out somewhere down here and then rise back up and then cross through that point. And so these are the 2 x-intercepts. So I want you to understand what those x-intercepts are, so that's why I'm having you circle them. So those are the 2 x-intercepts, 2 real roots, 2 solutions, another way to represent that. Well, the next problem is just one where we're supposed to solve a quadratic. It says find the solutions. So you can do it any way. You could use completing the square quadratic formula. I'm going to choose to factor. That's the way I would do all these problems. I always try factoring first because factoring is the easier method. It goes the fastest, I think. So y equals, or x squared plus 6x plus 8. So I set it equal to 0 when I factor. And then I draw 2 sets of parentheses. And I start with x and x, make x squared. Numbers that multiply to make 8 are 4 and 2. And they happen to add to make 6. So it does work out. Well, from there, you've just got to take those factors and set them equal to 0. And then from there, you solve for x. And so we end up having to subtract the 4. And one of the answers is negative 4. The other answer is, when we subtract the 2, we get negative 2. So those are the 2 x-intercepts, 2 solutions. Well, look at this last one. It says find the real roots. The real roots, those are just x-intercepts. Just solutions, same thing you did here. So you could just take this expression, x squared minus 3x minus 28, just set it equal to 0 and solve. So it's the same exact process. So here I'll draw the 2 sets of parentheses. I start off with x times x makes x squared. Numbers that multiply to make 28 are going to be 7 and 4. In order to get that negative 3, we're going to have a minus 7 and a positive 4. This is all set equal to 0. So you're going to do x minus 7 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. So here we have to add the 7 to all sides. So we end up with x equals 7. That's one of our answers. Here I got to subtract the 4. And I get my other answer, negative 4. So 7 and negative 4, the 2 x-intercepts. Well, those are the first 6 problems. Part 2 will have the last 3.